if reducing energy poverty, reducing energy costs is a selling point, which I believe it definitely is, if that's the outcome we want, then we need to build that into the recipe itself instead of considering them as the icing on the cake.
Welcome to the Passive House podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, inspiration, and connections from all flavours of Passive House, check out passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, get your questions answered, and contribute to the community dialogue. There's loads of free information for experienced professionals and people just starting out on their Passive House journey. We hope to see you at one of our weekly Passive House Accelerator live webinars. In the meantime, here's this week's Passive House podcast. Welcome back to the Passive House podcast. I'm Matthew Cutler, coming to you from Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland in New Zealand.
And I'm Zach Semke, coming to you from Seattle, Washington.
How are things in beautiful Seattle, Zach?
They are beautiful. Both our boys are away for summer camp right now, and our daughter is home from college, but she is extremely busy in the middle of the day or the middle of the week because she has a job at the Pacific Science Center during the day, and then she's involved in this marching band thing at night. So
awesome.
My wife and I took a couple of days in the middle of the week and did a little work retreat where we went to a place called Guemes Island, north of Seattle, really close to the San Juan Islands. And it was just so amazing and beautiful. And our lives were so simple.
Where there's not a lot there?
There's not a lot there. That is even more. It's like some of the San Juans. There's not a lot there, but Guemes Island even less there. Yeah, I think They have a single general store. There's like a store that sells animal feed, and that's it. So
awesome.
So we brought all of our groceries, and it was super quiet and just great. So yeah,
that's very cool.
It was nice. Cool. It was nice. Yeah. How about for you? How are you doing?
Well, yeah, pretty good. We're sort of halfway through our school year, so kids gone back to school, and there's snow around. Not so much here in the North Island, but there is some pretty good snow in the South Island, and I'm hoping to head down there next week. I'm actually heading to the Passive House conference in Christchurch, which will be around about when this podcast comes out. It's just a one-day event, a small event this year in Christchurch, but looking forward to that.
Nice.
Doing a few events, including a public talk or public lecture the night before. There's some practical training and then some site tours. And then as I'm going to be in Christchurch, I'm going to head down to some of the club fields in the South Island for a couple of days and check those out. So yeah, it's cold. I've got the heaters have been out of the cupboard the last little while, trying to stay warm, a little bit warmer during the night. And I've also been over to Australia a couple of times recently to visit my parents, and it's been surprisingly wet and windy in Adelaide. It doesn't tend to rain very much in Adelaide. It's kind of one of its features. It's extremely dry. But yeah, they've had well, I guess it is seasonal, but it's quite a high amount of rainfall. And they're also experiencing, unfortunately, a bit of a heat wave in their oceans, which is causing quite a lot of problems, including a big toxic algal bloom, which is not good for Australia. It was not good anywhere, but particularly in Australia, where so many people rely on and live by the sea, to have a toxic algal bloom, which is potentially made worse by some changes to the climate. It's not great.
I'm sorry to hear that. Yeah.
But we do have some more inspiring stuff to cover today. I got a really great interview with a friend and colleague of mine, Arthur Lee, who is based in the beautiful Queenstown, and he's part of the Queenstown Lakes Community Housing Trust. So he's going to talk about some of the work that he's been involved in. But before we get into that, we've got a few people to thank.
Indeed. So a big thank you to Zola Windows for being our sponsor of the week this week and supporting all of our programming at Passivhaus Accelerator, including this episode of the Passivhaus podcast. Thank you too to our stakeholder partner, NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. And thanks to our founding sponsors, 475 High Performance Building Supply, Ingui Architecture, Partel, Rockwell North America, and Zola Windows. And thanks to our champion sponsors, Bewizo, Cascadia Windows and Doors, European Architectural Supply, Facro, Icon Windows and Doors, Intelligent Membranes, LG Air Conditioning Technologies, and Source 2050.
Awesome. All right. So I've known Arthur for a few years now. He's been doing some great work. He is an architect, and his most recent position is with a community housing provider. In his case, the Queenstown Lakes community housing he's based in Queenstown. Beautiful place to be. Some quite challenging conditions down there, not least the weather, but also it's a very expensive place to build and to be. Land's very expensive down there. It's a very desirable place to be. So creating community housing is not necessarily the easiest thing to do. So we'll have a listen, and we'll jump in afterwards and have a bit of a chat. All right, Arthur Lee, thank you for joining us. First of all, tell us where you're calling from today. Can you describe where you are?
Sure, of course. Thank you, Matthew, for having me here. It's my first time being on the Passivhaus Accelerator, so I'm quite excited. Today I'm calling from Queenstown, New Zealand, which is like a ski resort town. And as you can imagine, the temperature is getting cold. Today is actually quite mild. When I say quite mild, I mean above zero.
Yeah, nice. But you're nice and cozy in your place.
Yeah, I'm quite lucky to secure this place about 4 years ago. The apartment is built well above the building code standard at the time, with some external insulation, thermally broken windows. So that allows me to basically afford to heat the place almost 24/7 to a healthy degree, to keep me warm all the time throughout winter.
Nice. Well, I want to get to that, but first let's start a little bit further back. Where are you from originally, and how did you get into architecture?
Oh, that's a really good question. So I was born in Auckland, and my family moved to Taiwan when I was very young. So I don't actually have much memory about Auckland. So I went to schools in Taiwan, and I came back to New Zealand after high school. And that's when I started kind of studying architecture. It's kind of a collective decision, just from my interests, my skill, what I'm good at. And then during my study in Wellington, at some point, my tutor introduced me this dual degree opportunity and sponsored me to go studying in Denmark. So that experience of studying in Denmark is really kind of the gateway for me to get into energy efficient buildings. Obviously, as we can imagine, Scandinavian countries, they do have pretty high standards for buildings in general. And towards the end of my study, the degree requires a half-year internship, and the quality of the projects they require all the students to work on has to be comparable to Danish standard. So when I came back to New Zealand and tried to find an internship, I really struggled until I found Tim Green Architects, who is a passive house designer who can produce the quality of work that's comparable to Danish standard. So I was really lucky. And then so I finished the internship and the project with Tim Green Architects, my first employer, and then finished the degree a year later.
And was that Paula Higgins, or was that Sian?
There's Sian Taylor.
Taylor.
Yeah, Tim Green.
Sian Taylor. You got so many people, passive house people down in Queenstown.
That's right.
So that exchange program, was there a particular reason why you ended up in Denmark?
So there are, I do know there are several polytechnics who have collaboration with VIA University College in Denmark. And then, so the exchange program, they basically run that exchange program internationally. And then, but what I did was a little bit different from just the exchange. I eventually registered as a full-time student and then obtained the degree. Yes, sorry, I don't know if this answers your question, but
no. So was it? I'm fascinated just how you ended up over there. And you said,
oh right, yeah.
That was a scholarship as well. So was that funded?
So basically, obviously, after like a few years of studying architecture, I'm kind of more and more aware of all the high standards and the amazing modern architectural trend that's being developed in Scandinavian countries. So that was kind of almost always my dream to at least go there, travel there, and stay there for a bit of time. But so suddenly when my tutor offered me the opportunity to go for the exchange and eventually register as a full-time degree, I basically almost say yes immediately. And I'm very grateful to this day for that opportunity. And in terms of like funding, I didn't get any scholarship from New Zealand, but after I went over there, I worked pretty hard, and then I ended up applying for the scholarship from Danish government, and then they eventually gave me free tuition for the rest of the degree after that initial half year. So yeah, again, I was very lucky.
And was that in English?
Yeah, the degree was in English. And basically, in Denmark is the first country in the world who offers a degree in architectural technology and construction management. Obviously, the modern day architecture is getting more and more complex, and the level of coordination and details is just ever increasing. So they saw the need to actually establish this profession as architectural technologists as a degree program rather than just a diploma program. So again, that's something very forward thinking in my opinion. And in recent years, you finally start seeing the polytechs in the UK, in New Zealand, they also start offering architectural technology as a degree program rather than just a diploma.
So you're back in New Zealand working with Sian. It's a very good, inspiring person to be working with. And did you start doing passive house homes straight away with Sian?
Yes. So after I joined Tim Green Architects, working with Sian and Mark, one of my first projects is actually their own house. So obviously, as one of the first passive house designers in the whole country, Sian basically see making their own house a certified passive house and non-negotiable. So I was pretty fortunate that I came from a very strong technical background with the education from Denmark, and then so I was almost immediately working with Mark and Sian on their own house and getting into all the and working through the whole energy modeling and passive house certification process all the way through until their house is certified. So that's
what was that like? What was that like going through the details? Did you know what? Were you familiar with New Zealand building products and materials and building systems at that time?
Yes or no. So obviously, I was literally kind of just graduated or just finished my study when I joined Team Green Architects. So I obviously learned a lot from uni in terms of NZS 3604, the typical New Zealand construction, how we insulate, and the building codes, all the requirements within the building codes in different clauses like the fire, the insulation, the energy efficiency, the plumbing and drainage. But to some degree, I was
But how different, like 3604, that must be different from what you learnt in Denmark.
Yeah, very, very different. So like in Denmark, we actually learn energy modeling, and we actually learn life cycle analysis, and we learn thermal bridging, we learn construction sequence, all of that. So it's just another level. And when I joined Team Green Architects, as I say, to some degree, I was kind of a blank canvas because I learned. I kind of have the theoretical background from both New Zealand and Denmark, so I kind of understand both sides, kind of the visionary outcome we aspire to, and the practical reality we need to work with. So obviously with Mark and Sean's own passive house, that was just an amazing learning experience, kind of working through all the challenges and reality. Obviously, everything still has to be buildable, and we have to source the right material and system from the right supplier in New Zealand. And then at the same time, try to integrate all that technology existing at the time or available at the time to make them all perform together and achieve passive house standard. So that experience is quite something else.
Did you find in Denmark, were there things that were available off the shelf that weren't available here in New Zealand that you had to figure out a way? So like thermal bridges, for example, were there systems that you had to sort of put together with local materials here to achieve an outcome that would be easier if you were building or designing that same house in Denmark?
I wouldn't say so. It's just completely different.
Right.
Like for example, external insulation, triple glazing, timber windows, all of those amazing components are basically the standard, or almost the building code standard in Denmark already.
Yeah.
But when Mark and Sean were designing their own passive house, that was almost 8 years ago now. All the system and products available in New Zealand are still quite limited. And I think that was also the time when NZ-SIPS was just starting out. So we kind of researched that system, and then we gave it a go. And obviously NZ-SIPS has since being used on many passive houses in New Zealand. The structural insulated panel just provides superior insulation and airtightness almost by default as a complete proven system straight out of factory. So I think that was definitely a good decision at the time. We just fully embraced that system, so the entire house is almost made from SIPs other than the slab. And obviously the slab is another interesting topic because at the time there was almost no proprietary fully insulated slab system. So we almost invented our own thermal break details. And in that case, we also have retaining walls, so that makes things even trickier. So we insulate behind and on both sides of the retaining wall, and then try to break between the house retaining wall and the outdoor retaining wall in a typical New Zealand construction, the entire retaining wall will just be a solid piece of concrete, kind of spine wall going all the way through. And as we know, concrete it is a material that's highly heat conductive, that could have caused severe thermal bridging. So there are obviously a few details we almost needed to invent from scratch, but from a high-end residential projects perspective, like architects and designers invent details all the time anyway. But in this case, it just means we prioritize our effort and energy on inventing details that will give them a really, really warm, comfortable homes instead of kind of a detail that's showing off the art purely for others or the magazines.
And by all accounts, that house has performed pretty well. It's I think they've been living in it for a few years now. They're pretty comfy and happy with it.
Absolutely, yeah. So it delivers everything Passive House promises and more.
Yeah, nice. Well, let's jump forward a bit. You did a few things in that intervening time, but I really want to focus in on your current role at Queenstown Lakes Community Housing Trust. Can you just describe for our international listeners, how would you sum up the concept of community housing and what you do as a trust?
Right, I'll try my best. So, community housing provider is just basically a non-government affordable housing provider. So in New Zealand, for example, we have Kangaora, which is the state housing provider, is fully funded by the central government, and locally there are tens of different community housing providers developing rental and permanent homes for the local community, and then really addressing the need for the local community. So there are obviously a few things in common across all the affordable housing providers, both locally and nationally, is that we want to help lower to middle income household to have a permanent, healthy, high quality place to call home and establish a stable life and thrive. So those are the core values we are working towards, and that will be the same value share across almost all the affordable housing providers.
Yeah, and how's your housing stock at the moment? How would you describe the typical houses that you're or have been working with and are currently working with?
Right. So Queenstown Housing Trust, we currently have about I think it's between 160 to 180 homes on our portfolio, and the majority of them are still detached single houses, but we also have duplex and multi-units. And the reason of having the mix of the current portfolio is just it just came from kind of the land supply in the past 13 years, and then the land we have secured over the course of the past 13 years basically are residential sections for single houses. So basically, community housing providers are still housing developers, but we just operate in a profit ways. So that this will be another way to look at what community housing providers are. So essentially, we are still housing developers. And the projects on the drawing board, we we try really hard to push for more comprehensive projects. That means we can play and benefit from things like potentially higher density. We can influence things like urban design and share amenity to a larger degree. And then by doing so, we can actually create community rather than just providing housing. And at the same time, as we know, a healthy community, we kind of need like a small community within a larger community within the society. So what we are trying to do harder right now is sometimes like creating a village within the village within the Queenstown Lakes community. So there are these layers, and then by having more comprehensive developments, we can we can benefit from kind of we can trace more to the roots of like human well-being and then energy efficiency and really address and kind of plant the seeds for the outcomes we want from the very beginning.
Yeah. Where does that desire to do better housing, genuinely better housing, come from? Because you're a trust, you're like all trusts, you're constrained financially, so you've got to make every dollar count. It would be easy to just put all of that towards building houses as cheaply as possible to achieve the mandate of just housing people. So where does that motivation come from to do better than just what's legal?
Yeah, that's a brilliant question. I suppose it's mainly it mainly comes from the deep care of people, myself and my team, and the board all share. Essentially, the identity of all community housing providers is kind of balanced between affordability and people. So when it comes to affordability, it's not just affordability to build, buy, or rent. It's also an affordability to run and maintain. And when it comes to people, like almost all human activities are there for people, right? We don't create human activities for animal, the plants, or environment. Essentially, the core driver is all about the people. So when we put people at the center of our developments, their health and their well-being, their financial stress, whether they can have a place to thrive rather than struggle, those kind of things are critically important for us. And I believe it's those are the things that are very important for all the community housing provider as well. Essentially, that's what we are here for. We are here to provide those outcomes for our people, and obviously affordability is a massive part of it. So that almost kind of answered the question already. Why do we build better? Because that's the only way we can basically match our identity, or the identity we want, I suppose, is achieving that balance between affordability and what's the best for our people.
Yeah. What are some of the physical things that you've added? There's some of the features of those houses that have brought that to life, that distinguish your homes now above a standard house just built to code.
Yeah, so basically Queenstown Housing Trust, I think our very first project was completed about 13 years ago. And since the first project, they kind of quickly realized building to code minimum standard was rather insufficient to provide the ideal outcome we want for our people. So ever since my team had secured a series of incremental upgrades. I think since the second project, they started using 140 framing by default. For the audience um, who are unfamiliar with New Zealand building code, basically the standard framing thickness in New Zealand is just 90. So 140 framing is basically adding 50% thicker framing and insulation together. And probably another 2-3 years later, they discover, oh, there is such thing as fully insulated foundation with slab edge insulation, and then there are proprietary system to deliver those fully insulated foundation and a warmer slab outcome. So they kind of standardize that as well. And I'm pretty sure it's in 2018, because of a series of complaints from households about severe condensation, because we tend to build smaller houses to keep housing affordable. So without proper mechanical ventilation, condensation is just getting out of control. So they did a series of blow door tests to fully understand firstly how airtight our home is, and then what airtightness level reflects to certain condensation level. And then what they found out, kind of as a conclusion from that study, is as long as a home has reliable, continuous mechanical ventilation, condensation is just not really an issue. And without it, and only rely on people opening their window even in the middle of winter, no matter what level of air tightness is, condensation is always gonna be a severe issue. So ever since 2018, my team also introduced mechanical ventilation, and more recently, heat recovery mechanical ventilation as our default. So basically, by the time when I joined the Housing Trust last year, the Housing Trust default for new developments was already well above the legal minimum standard. And to be honest, in some way, those should be considered as the real minimum standard, because based on the studies and our own experience and our feedback loop from our households over the past 13 years, what we are doing right now is almost considered as the bare minimum to provide the basic environment that's at least healthy for people. So so since I joined about almost a year ago now, what I'm mainly doing is basically optimizing everything. So instead of just saying, okay, we throw 140 framing, we throw fully insulated foundation, we throw an MVHR into the building, I actually look at the whole building as a bigger picture and make sure all those systems work together as efficiently as possible to deliver that final outcome, which is reducing the living costs for people and improving the warmth and health for people all at the same time.
And you mentioned to me previously that the board is pretty motivated to continue on a improvement pathway, but you've done a bit of modelling on your existing houses, previous ones, and sort of looking ahead. So what's been your feedback and suggestions to the board?
Yeah, so that was another very cool experience. So obviously, I was one of the key tasks after I was hired is to produce a sustainability strategy. So even though I just mentioned a bunch of kind of upgrades and good stuff my team has secured over the years, we actually didn't have any strategy around sustainability until earlier this year. So I basically, after I joined the trust, I retrospectively energy model our developments in the past 13 years to fully understand our gradual progress and the continuous improvement trend in a way. And then what I figured out was on an annual basis, in the past 13 years, we improved about 3% in terms of energy efficiency in our new homes. And then, so that kind of has become the baseline. And then I did a bunch of exercise in terms of, okay, how we can potentially do better, and then what's required to enable us to do better. For example, as you mentioned previously, cost has always been a severe constraint, and also Queenstown is the most expensive place to build in the entire New Zealand. So we are obviously at the forefront of that challenge. So there are a few kind of core actions and key principles and philosophies I have identified to hopefully help us to accelerate the improvement trend, like things like we need to energy model every development or every typology. And the second thing is we need to come back to the drawing board and make sure everything is designed smarter, simpler, and smaller. So design smarter for people and simpler for construction. And once we've done those, we can potentially look at building smaller. When I say smaller, it's not really a compromise after we really make sure the design is good for people in the first place. But designing smaller means we minimize the waste space. We also minimize the share of resource and building material that's used in the first place. So that all three actions together should help us to establish a much stronger foundation for both energy efficiency and cost management. So I earlier this year I presented the strategy and the guiding principles to the board, and I also proposed, instead of a 3% annual improvements going forward, we want 5%. And when I presented all of those at the board meeting, our chair basically said to me, oh, in the past 13 years, we didn't actually feel like we were trying at all. We just kind of did one thing at a time. And then if that's 3% already, then now with you on board, why not 10%? So I actually had to come up with the GDP analogy to explain why we can't actually have 10%. For example, you can see developing countries growing their GDP by 10% per year, but you just simply can't see the same number from a developed country, right? So when we improve our benchmark, it's actually getting harder to improve further instead of easier. So obviously, I do see great potential out there, especially now with my knowledge in design and energy modeling. I can capture those low-hanging fruits and then those design solutions. So I do feel like 5% yearly improvements is a realistic target. So I managed to convince our board that 5% is okay instead of 10%. So this will be our new target the whole operational team has to work towards in the next 10 years. So it's 5% every year for the next 10 years.
Just finally, what would you say to people that say that going above the code or aiming to getting further and further towards passive house, which is essentially what you're doing, is too expensive?
I think the key thing is, again, we do need to come back to the drawing board and make sure everything is designed smarter, simpler, and smaller. And this is almost the only way to lay down that strong foundation to effective cost management, and in a way that's not compromising on livability and user experience. But in terms of like just looking at the pure cost, like the cost uplift to get to a better housing standard, again, I'll say we do need to come back one step and then truly ask ourselves the question, what's the product we want to deliver for people? I can give you an example. To get to Homestar 6, based on our latest project, I think we spent about 3% more, just over 3% more on the construction costs, but that gives us Homestar 6. And Homestar 6 in Queenstown climate means about 40% more energy efficient compared to legal minimum standard. And that's already 40% at 3% more construction costs. And at about 5%, we can, according to my internal numbers, I believe we can get to Homestar 7. And then that's another significant upgrade or improvements on energy efficient. And then if we do have the budget, if we throw another 25K, for example, to have solar and batteries, that will almost cover 100% of the power bill. So all of that sounds like a lot, but in another way, that's basically the cost of having a single garage. So
right. Yeah.
Sometimes when we come one step back, okay, do we want the household living there to have almost zero power bill for the next 20 years, or we want a single garage? So suddenly when we look at the balance, it becomes quite, how do I say, just quite mind-blowing. It's like, oh, actually, there is another way to look at what housing is supposed to deliver for people. Not to mention all the social benefits. All the households living in that buildings we create will be warm all the time for the next more than 20 years for the lifetime of that building, basically, and enjoy very, very small power bill. So if that's the outcome we want, if reducing energy poverty, reducing energy costs is a selling point, which I believe it definitely is. If that's the outcome we want, then we need to build that into the recipe itself instead of considering them as the icing on the cake.
Yeah.
So energy efficiency, lower running costs, lower energy poverty, lower living costs. If we want those outcomes, then we actually need to make them as part of the cake rather than treat them as the icing on the cake.
Nice. We're just about out of time, so thank you very much, Arthur. Really appreciate your work, and really inspiring stuff. And I think you're leading in that community housing space, which is fantastic. So thank you very much for that.
No worries, it's my pleasure. Thank you, Matthew.
And that was Arthur Lee, who is the designer and managing a lot of the technical work and projects for the Community Housing Trust based in Queenstown. What do you think, Zach?
Oh, well, it was fantastic. And it's another reminder of the important role that the affordable housing community plays in adoption of better buildings generally, and definitely with the spread of passive house. I have a question for you, and that is related to Homestar 6 and Homestar 7. So Arthur mentioned that Homestar 6 is 40% more efficient than base code in New Zealand. How does Homestar 6 or 7 compare to passive house performance?
It would be about twice the allowable energy. Depends a little bit on the climate zone, but if you get right up to the top of the scale, which is a 10 Homestar, then that is effectively a passive house in terms of energy. So the requirements there are 15 kilowatt hours per square meter. I think for Arthur's climate zone, it's around sort of 50 or 60. So it's a lot better than code, but it gets people on the journey towards higher performance and then towards passive house. One of the key things it does is encourage people to do energy modeling. And as a consequence of that, they actually get a figure in kilowatt hours per square meter, which isn't required as part of the building code. So even just getting designers, getting the industry to think about the design and come up with a figure in kilowatt hours per square meter is quite a big step forward.
Yeah, definitely. That makes sense. I was struck by the story of his pathway to passive house, and coming back from Denmark, looking for an internship and needing to find a firm that was doing work that was up to snuff from Denmark's perspective, right?
Yeah.
Like it needed to be like in line with Denmark standards, or Danish standards for buildings, and landing with a passive house firm, Team Groom Architects, who we've had Sian Taylor on early on in the Passive House podcast. Yep. It was looking at episode 25. And Sian also presented at Passive House Accelerator Live, the Threepwood Passive House project. So we'll include links to both of those in the show notes. But that was, and I have to say that was a unique pathway to passive house. It's like I need to find something that'll make the Danish happy with my internship. And man, the only people doing that work are passive house people.
Yeah, well, there's a bit in that. I'm actually looking a little bit at the vocational training at the moment. At the top, we talked about the fact we got sort of college age kids, and I'm very conscious of the fact that there's a real push for people to go to university, and I'm working with a few people right now to sort of encourage people to think about other options, including travel, but also looking at trades. And I think there's definitely something to that if a young person goes and visits somewhere else and particularly if they're interested in building or something like that, goes and works in a place overseas that's building to a much different standard, they're just not going to settle for coming back to somewhere like New Zealand, Australia, where the codes are so much lower, and just parts of are completely missing, like airtightness. But if you start your training somewhere like Scandinavia or Germany or even Canada, you're just not going to settle for doing anything less, or it's going to be very challenging to build without those features. So I think that's a really great way for us to think about changing the next generation of building professionals by exposing them to how things are done in the finding that the best examples from around the world, really, and sort of indoctrinating them early. And then they won't go back.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I thought your question to him about what is the motivation for Queenstown Housing Trust to be doing these better buildings was a really good one. And his emphasis on the mission of the organization to help people and help people, improve their health and reduce financial stress, and increase their ability to thrive. Like all those things point toward building better. And of course, finding doing that in a cost-effective way. And the notion that there's this bare minimum for a healthy building, and with that means thicker walls, insulated foundation, mechanical ventilation, reducing condensation. Like those things are like should be the baseline. And then this 5% incremental improvement, like that's gonna add up quickly if you're doing that every year.
I'm fascinated by, and I have been for a long time, about how community housing providers, public housing, social housing, whatever it is, affordable housing could be done to such a high standard. Because one of the biggest complaints we always get, or one of the biggest objections we talk about passive house, is price. But it just seems to, I know it's a different market, but I really struggle with a luxury homeowner or someone building to the private market, uses that as an objection when there are so many examples of people providing truly affordable housing that genuinely looks after people in a really good way. If they can do it, I don't see why others can't do it in the private market and sell that as Arthur has. Well, in fact, in Arthur's case, the board is totally on board, and he's actually had to hold them back because he's made the point that aiming for 10% improvement year on year that's pretty rapid change, and he's taken a very pragmatic view of that and said, well, that's awesome. How about we aim for 5? Because he knows what that would look like on the ground to get to have to be responsible for achieving that sort of 10%. So he sort of said, well, hang on. I'm happy to push for 5, which is still really significant. That's a very impressive. That if you do that for 5-10 years, you end up substantially better off. For generations to come. So really, really great stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, that's it for this week, for this week's main interview. What have we got coming up on the accelerator and also over at Reimagine Buildings?
Yeah, so the accelerator is we have original articles coming out every week, and we've got the podcast. There's plenty of stuff going on the accelerator. However, Passive House Accelerator Live is on break for July and August. So our 2025-2026 season starts in the first Wednesday of September, and we're really excited about that. In the collective, we are very busy. We have a series of labs, small cohorts that are tackling a pressing problem in the world of climate and building and resilience and health. We have 9 of these labs going on this summer, meeting a few times throughout the summer, and they'll be producing insight briefs and sharing their insights with all of us. So that's kind of happening behind the scenes. Within the collective, we have Ask Me Anything's sessions every Friday and Reimagine Tuesday interviews by Michael Ingui every Tuesday. So we have experts and residents who are sharing their insights with us. This coming Friday, August 1st, we're joined by Martin Comas from Uruguay. So people who came to the Reimagine Buildings 25 conference will remember his very cool tiny house, passive house project that it was very inspiring, just figuring out how to make projects happen on a shoestring budget and to do them quickly. So Martine will be sharing that approach with us and answering questions about that on the 1st. And then we have a community member meetup on the 5th. And then we have a Reimagine Tuesday interview with Andrew Peel by Michael Ingui. Andrew is the owner and principal of Peel Passive House and a really important leader in passive house practice in North America. So lots going on. It's fun.
Lots going on. Awesome. All right. Hey, well, thank you for all of that. Thank you again to our sponsors. Thanks for listening in, and we'll be back again next week on the Passive House Podcast.